Hi guys, now listen, this is going to be fairly confronting for me, so please be as gentle as you possibly can. You know how people say they're going to write a book, and they don't? I, did. And I had an editor a while ago, but they quit, and so I've lost touch with them, and I have what I think is a pretty good opening salvo of chapters from this book, so I'm just going to quickly read the first chapter of this book. This is, by the way, absolutely bloody frightening for me. Like, I'm not adverse to, like, bearing my soul in front of people, but this is very confronting. So what I'm going to read you is the first chapter of a detective novel. I'm kind of still writing, I'm almost finished, but basically it's called Bear Town, and it's kind of, it'll make sense. So, yeah, here's chapter 1 of Bear Town. Please be kind. I would love your feedback, but just, Anyway, this is really scary for me. Here we go. Chapter 1. My name is Rufus Toddhill, and my wife is a bear. It's always hard to top a statement like that, especially when it ceased being a conversation starter and started being something you're legally required to state when applying for a job, or welfare, or a table at a particularly decent restaurant. But my wife is a bear, and sooner or later the world is going to have to accept that. Sometime around the summer of 1946, right around when boatloads of war vets were scuttling home like wounded crabs. I say like wounded crabs because they were men, not crabs. Nor were they bears. At least, not yet. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. The city was filling back up with people. The streets were buzzing again, and in my line of work, you need people buzzing if you're going to make $1, or, if you're feeling particularly optimistic of a given day, several. And on a hot morning that August, everything went dark. And when we woke up, the bears were there. All over the shop. Me? I was back at the office, filing claims with my partner being a wiseacre over by the window, heckling what he dubbed a fat, wealthy broad with ankles like load-bearing Grecian urns. I asked him when an urn, Grecian or otherwise, would ever have call to bear a load, Grecian or otherwise, when the fog hit. Thick and ruddy, smelling like some insipid little member of the periodic table. One without a vowel. One hiding down near the yellowing dog-eared corner, somewhere just out of eyeshot. Somewhere dark. I came to, slumped against a filing cabinet. I'd managed to land all twisted, like a broken doll. My foot was asleep, and it wasn't until I'd been stamping my foot awake loudly for a good minute that I noticed the snoring, heaving mass of brown hair jutting out from behind Henderson's desk. Now, my first thought was that Henderson had let himself go. My second was to immediately discount the first thought and groggily approach what was, it was becoming increasingly clear, a large grizzly bear, dozing fitfully several feet from my tender, supple, vulnerable body. And when I got close enough, I could see the torn remnants of a tweed suit, spread out below the bear like what I would have referred to as a rug. This, however, conjured up an uncomfortable metaphor involving the skin of said animal. So rather than rouse my brain into higher cognition, I stumbled over to my desk, flung the stopper out of a particularly sensuous decanter of whiskey, threw down a belt, tightened it, and stared vacantly out at the bay. Now the papers did what papers always do. They yelled. They yelled inanely, but after a day or so it became apparent the problem couldn't be yelled away, or locked away, or negotiated away, or even folded up and put away in a closet. Half the US Senate was now made up of bears, which meant the bears could make laws that made bears untouchable. Half of the press were bears now, so eventually the negative stories were whittled away until, partly in the spirit of equality, but mostly because an inclement sub-editor was just as likely to chew you out now as to chew you out. My partner, Henderson, a man with a name as innocuous as his face, has suddenly become a bear. A very large bear, actually. A particularly nasty race riot 3 suburbs over suddenly had its tables turned when a trio of young Negroes, beset, as they were, by 10 or so ruffians, just about ready to Broderick the children in question, turned into bears, and meted out what the San Francisco Chronicle reticently dubbed a hair in the ointment of racial prejudice. It took about a week for the foofara to die down. Maybe people were tired on account of the war. Or maybe they were tired because of all the trouble with money, or taxes, or maybe they had the vapors on account of that damnable Gregory Peck fella and his damnable marriage-ending jawline. But if we're going to establish a frank, open discourse, which I hope we can, I'll come clean with you. Things died down quickly because the bears could talk. They knew who they were, and they weren't shy about talking about it, and because they were okay with it, so were we. In the same way that a dying man filled with stoicism and vigor imbues his relatives with a sense of ease, these bears, most of them anyway, were totally calm. Maybe calm isn't the right word. They were rational? Yeah, they were rational. They saw no reason to make a fuss, and after a while, neither did we. And so the world kept on turning. Like I said, my name is Rufus Todhill, and my wife is a bear. Oh, that was weird. That's chapter 1 of Beartown. There's loads more. There's plot twists, and there's huge story arcs, and there's some really mental stuff that happens very soon. And I think I've done a pretty good job of setting the scene. It's sort of magical realism-ish. Anyway, that was really scary. Thank you for listening. If you liked it, I don't know, like it, reblog it, comment, whatever. Just leave something in my ask box. If you don't, you probably didn't get this far. Anyway, thank you very much for listening, and I am now going to throw up, because that was terrifying.